Welcome. I am Joy Richardson, and I am part of our consulting team with FH Black& Company. It's great to be speaking with you today. We're going to be talking about your capstone training that covers using the Workiva platform for your GASB Lite tool. For some, this is going to be a refresher of what we worked on together during our implementation. If you're new to the team, please note that capstone training does not stand alone. There is a set of prerequisite courses from the Workiva Learning Hub that this training builds upon and that will help you in understanding the navigation and nomenclature we will be using during this training. Our agenda will be to cover these topics. Each one will be treated as a separate chapter. Let's start with the introduction. As we begin talking about your workspace, here are some things to keep in mind. As you know, Workiva is a SaaS-based solution, and that means if you have a browser and an internet connection, you're able to work wherever you are. Also, it's a data-centric reporting tool, which is the key that makes Workiva and its data management suite different than other vendors. The benefit of this is when you take the Workiva technology and overlay it with the FH Black best practices, you will get a solution that can reduce the need to manually key information, make it easier to reconcile information, and in general, reduce the time it takes to manage your GASB contracts and appropriate calculations, schedules, and disclosures. To introduce you to your workspace, we have included the link to access Wdesk in your production environment. We have also included the name of your test environment and a sample snip of your folder structure. In your workspace, if we click in the upper right-hand corner of the workspace name, a drop-down appears here that shows the available workspaces and where you would go to update members or settings. On the left-hand side is the navigation pane, and if we select Files, we will see your folder structure. We want to select the GASB parent folder. Just as a reminder, you may need to go to the admin icon in the middle at the top to select View Everything in this workspace. We also want to point out that Workiva tracks where you have been here under Recent Files, and you can also star items such as the agency input sheet identifiers, Spreadsheet, so they will appear in the Starred tab. To turn on a star, you simply click the star itself and it will turn yellow. To turn it off, you click the star again. Both of these recent files and starred are great tools for easy reference. Within the GASB parent folder, you see a folder for each procurement, plus an archive folder that may have been automatically created during the roll forward process and implementation. You also see several supporting spreadsheets that we will review later during this video. The PBC folder is for prepared by client. You may rename that at a later date, but this is where we have stored particular information for your convenience. We will start with the 87 procurement folder, which contains all agencies. For each agency, there are 3 spreadsheets: the lessee input, lessor input, and the UI access details. If we select the 96 procurement folder, and go to an agency, in each agency, there are 2 spreadsheets. And here is the user interface access and the GASB 96 input. as there is only one type of SPIDA. Each procurement will contain a similar hierarchical folder structure. Now let's discuss configuration. In the configuration section, we will be reviewing the setup of your GASB Lite tool. Each procurement will have similar screens depending on requirements and nomenclature. All of this is found within the Agency Input Sheet Identifiers spreadsheet in the GASB parent folder. This includes the status page that stores the status of the chains, organization parameters, which stores the current fiscal year, asset class thresholds, column mappings, which allow users to identify your organization's account names, and codes to be used in journal entries, and the agency's sheet, which provides controls and access to each. On the agency sheet, there will be a spreadsheet containing turning on and off the agencies, the procurement sheet IDs, recipient emails, and procurement URLs. Within the GASB parent folder, at the top of the folder structure, you find the agency input sheet identifiers. This spreadsheet contains information which will be used for each of the different procurements of GASB's 87 and 96. The first item, status of the chain, will be reviewed in Section 4. The organization parameters define the org year for all procurements. This currently shows the date for the fiscal year end of June 30, 2024. A change to the year-end date will force an automatic recalculation of all contracts. This date should not be modified as it is managed by the roll-forward process to be discussed in Section 7. Asset class thresholds store the thresholds for each procurement, which you see on the separate sheets. This allows the flexibility to apply different threshold amounts to different types of contracts and/or underlying assets. Asset class categories are an FHB standard and cannot be altered. However, additional guidance can be added to the user interface to aid in the proper selection. We will discuss more about your thresholds, but specifically for the changes that need to be made that currently would affect prior years. So for you, we are documenting a separate process to identify how to manage thresholds, and we will continue to work on a solution. Note that in the GASB 96 workspace, there is only one unassigned threshold. If the present value calculated for a threshold, for a contract is less than the threshold for that particular type, no further calculation is performed and specific information will be identified. We will show an example in Section 5. A change to any threshold amount will also force an automatic recalculation of all contracts. Column mappings contain account names and codes for journal entry presentation for each procurement. Column A contains the standard FHB account names, which cannot be altered. Column B contains the account names that your organization wants to use within the journal entries. Clients may use the account name for multiple times. However, the account codes must also be the same. So, for example, here I have two that are lease liability long-term portion. Clients can use the same account name multiple times. However, the account codes must also be the same. So, for example, other rentals and the numbers are the same. Column C identifies the governmental GL account code, and column D identifies the enterprise GL account codes to be used in the journal entries if applicable. The account codes may be modified and will render the appropriate account number for the journal entries. A change to any account name or code will force an automatic recalculation of all contracts within that procurement. Let's also review the Lessee Asset Class Custom Spreadsheet, which allows you to identify more than one asset class and account code for our standard columns. For example, let's look at the standard lessee sheet. The two lines here for intangible right to use lease asset and accumulated amortization only provide one account per line. And here we provide the intangible right to use lease asset for each asset class as we do for the accumulated amortization, which allows you to be able to further identify and break out the accounts that you would like to use. You will need to continue to maintain this for any future changes. And then last but not least is the account properties spreadsheet, which is a continual of the types, the account codes. But what is different is we identify the statement type and the normal sign for those specific accounts. Two would need to be maintained if changes were made in the future. This information is specifically used in the custom queries. And then on the agency spreadsheet, FHB provides a master list of all agencies and by procurement, their related sheet IDs, email addresses, and the URLs for the user interfaces. The first column, enabled, controls if that agency will be calculated. If set to no, the system will not perform calculations for any items on that agency's input sheet. Note if there are new or updated agencies in the future. Please enter a support ticket and we will add or update the new assets, such as the spreadsheets, URLs, and updated folder structure in each procurement. There may be other client-specific configurations within the user interface, which will be discussed in Section 3. Now, let's enter data into the GASB Lite tool. In the data entry section, we will focus on getting data into and then editing the data in the GASB Lite tool. There are currently 3 ways to get data into the system. We can import historical data, which we may have done in the implementation. Complete the import form by accessing the user interface, which is the FHB recommended best practice, and edit the input sheet manually, which is discouraged as it could lead to data inconsistencies. Remember in the introduction, we discussed that for GASB 87, each of the agency folders have 3 spreadsheets: the lessee input, lessor input, and the UI access details. This folder structure was created specifically to aid in the security of the data. The client has the option to set up permissions so that only those with specific permissions can access specific. Here we will focus on the FHB recommended best practice of always using the user interface or input form method allowing the system to translate the data correctly to reduce manual errors. So let's select agency 3900. We're going to go to the access details, and you see only one spreadsheet that will have the URL. And when I select that, a quick link is going to pop up that I just clicked on to click directly and open your input form. As a reminder, since your organization has authentication set up, you will need to add any new users to that system as well before they will be able to access the user interface URL. Once the login is accepted, the 87 decision tree will appear. So I have saved my credentials here. And I can sign in. And it takes me directly into your system. Now, since I have just done that, if I were to go out and come back in under a different agency or whatever because of my permissions, then I would not necessarily have to log back in. It does recall them for a small window of time so that you're not continually returning. Now, at the top of the screen, you see what we call client-specific information. Your organization logo and agency ID, along with your preface, appears here. You can enter a new contract or change an existing one by selecting the Change Existing Lease button. We're going to start with entering a new one. Now, there are two types of information collected. The first set are qualifying questions to determine if the lease qualifies for 87 disclosure, simply because we're in 87. If the system determines the lease qualifies based on the answers, the next set of questions would collect information about the lease for calculations and disclosures. We are only reviewing the GASB 87 user interface in this capstone. Each procurement has a set of qualification and collection questions based on the applicable GASB standard. Each has been configured as requested to include headings and entities and the gray text to provide further direction and/or additional information requested by your organization. So you can see this particular gray text tells you what the format should be. Questions that are followed by a red asterisk are required to be answered. Questions include GASB references. Questions with underlines contain pop-ups with additional information. If you refresh or close the browser before successful completion, no data will be saved. It is exactly like shopping online. So let's fill in a few of these. And I am going to select lessee. And here is my question with my answers. And I'm going to say yes. It is immediately going to tell me this is not an 87 lease. No further input is required. If this is correct, I would do save and send to Workiva, and it would be captured on my non-qualifying spreadsheet. In this case, I think I did wrong. I'm going to click cancel and come back. So I wanted to show you an example of how the qualification process works. Does the contract transfer ownership and does not contain termination options? At the commencement, is the possible maximum term 12 months or less, meaning is it short term? Does a contract exist that conveys control in an exchange or an exchange-like transaction? Does the contract specify that equal or near equal value is exchanged? Does the contract meet both of the following criteria? Is there an identified non-financial asset such as, and because I was able to answer all of those and get through that process, the system agrees that this is an actual 87 lease. And now I would need to complete the details to be able to do part two, which is gather the rest of the information. So as I come through here, you can see that my department and agency has pre-populated based on the selection above when I clicked on my URL and I said I was in department or agency 3900. Based on that, I have a selection box of what funds I would be able to select. And then I have a lease start date. So I am currently in the year 6/30/2024. So if I were to enter a lease start date of something after that date, it would retain the information, but when I calculate and run the chains, nothing would happen because it is not in the current fiscal year. So here I am going to actually make sure it is in that year. Going to use the same date for my payment. The lease increment between payments, I am going to say that it is monthly. Does it begin or end with the payments so monthly is obvious. It's either the 1st or the 31st. But if it's annual, and let's say it's on a calendar year, is the payment in January or is the payment in December? So that is what we mean by end and beginning of period. So I am going to say beginning. And just as a note here, our system only calculates to the month. So if I had a lease start date or a payment date, it does not matter if you input the 1st, the 15th, or the 31st. We are only going to the month and we do not calculate, for example, 10 days or 30 or 25 days. Lease period in months, I'm going to say 36. If you have something that is not equally divisible, meaning that say it is quarterly, but it is 20 months. 20 months does not divide evenly divided by 4. Um, and if I said it is annual and I put in 38 months, 36 months would be divisible evenly by annually. So anything that does not match the period that you chose, then it would automatically become monthly. And then this is your annual rate. We will convert that into a monthly rate. And then I'm going to specify payments. So if my payments, I have said monthly, if they are all the same, every month it's $10,000. I can put that in here. If I have an escalation rule, I would use this tab. And if my payments vary or infrequent, then I would need to do the monthly breakdown. So here I am going to say 10,000. I'm going to tell it to autofill. And so now it has populated that for me. But let's say that this payment is not going to be made and that payment, and then this one is going to be 20,000 and accept and close. So I would need to still be set to monthly if I wanted to have infrequent or inconsistent amounts. The system will provide a validation here in green. And then do I have any other prep costs, future payments, incentives, purchase options? Is the underlying asset depreciable? What is that useful life? And then what is the lease asset class? So here, our standard asset classes do not exactly correlate with the states. And so we have provided additional information to help you make the right decisions. So if this was space rental, I would post that to improvements other than buildings. And if it's copiers, it would go to furnishings and equipment, so on and so forth. I'm just going to say buildings and save and send. Okay, so by clicking on Save and Send, it would automatically then come to the appropriate lessee input sheet. And so I did not do that in this case. Um, I did not want the data to actually populate into your system. So if I come here on the production environment, I will show you an example of how the payment string and the information is captured. So there may be things that we did not actually answer. We did not answer fund type because we assumed that based on other information that was provided during implementation. We have a lookup table. We also did not answer separate disclosure. And the way that we answered our monthly payments does not look like it does here because the system takes that information and puts it into a software readable format so that it knows how to process that information. And then I have the payment sequences, increments between payments, depreciation, useful life, asset classes. So now that there is information here, I am able to run the chains and I will get those appropriate responses. And we will, of course, go through those calculations in a later section. And then, although not recommended, deletions and corrections can be made directly in the input sheet. But we're going to show you how to use the input form to make those changes. And remember that the same screens and spreadsheets exist in the 96 section. The only differences are the terminology and requirements. So now if I come back to the user interface and I click Change Existing Lease, and it will populate with what is already here. And I can select one, and now it's going to provide me with specific questions that I will need to answer. So in this case, how do you want to change the lease? Each one of these options has a question mark with a tooltip to explain more information. So if you wanted to delete, this is the option that you would do, and it would provide more information. If you are in your current year and you have entered something that's incorrect, you can come here and make a correction. Just know that if your lease starts in a prior fiscal year, you could be changing prior year data. And then all other changes are going to be relative to modifications, remeasurements, terminations, etc. So am I adding an underlying lease? I'm going to say no. The next question is this a full termination? In my case, no. But if you did have a full termination, you would put in that date and the system would generate the appropriate journal entries. And here I am going to say that my effective date, I still want that in the current year, which we have given you a reminder of where we are. Load and amend the lease, and it pre-populates all of the fields with the previous information. So I can make any changes to this information that is not currently grayed out. So for example, lease type is grayed out because that is a totally different set of journal entries depending on if it's lessee or lessor. And then as I scroll through, I could make any of the changes that I needed. And then I would simply accept those changes and it would populate back here as well. What you would see different is the exact one that you already had would be here. And then, so you would have a separate line. So for example, you would have this one that said 39-2024-01. And then there would be another line that had 39-2024-01. But in this field, would have an R1 for the first revision. And then the information would be what you had edited. So it would show everything that had been there except with the new updated information. And we will show you that as we get into the summaries, the calculations, the journal entries, so that you will actually see one. Now, if this had been a termination, you would see a T in this field with a date, the termination date. And then, of course, other information, just like when we input one originally, that information would display differently than how it was entered in the system through the user interface because the system requires that certain format and it does that conversion of that data for you. These are all reasons why the FHB recommended best practice is to use the user interface or the input form. Now, let's generate the calculations. In the status or change section, we will review the process of running chains, which is how the data inputs are calculated and the journal entries and summaries are processed, as well as the WData tables are updated for use in queries. Briefly, there are two ways to access chains: by selecting Chains or by selecting WData, then Chains, then Chain Builder. You will need to confirm which environment you are in and then select the chain. Next, you would execute and run the chain. And last, you would monitor the status page under the agency input sheet identifiers. Everything we have shared so far has been in Wdesk. Now we need to access WData where the chains are located. On the left-hand navigation pane, you can click on Chains, which is this snake-looking icon, or you can click on WData, which is the cube, and then click on Chains. And then click on Chain Builder. Either way will bring you to the home screen. And on the home screen, I want to mention that there are visual cues for the icons to let you know if you're in Wdesk or WData. So if you look up at the top, when we were over here in Wdesk, the W for Workiva is green, as is this ID. And when we were over here in Workiva Chains, the W is blue, and down here you see WData Chains are also in blue. So that helps you to know where you are. Now, from the home screen's navigation pane, we are going to select Chains, and then you'll confirm the environment you're in, which is currently your production. And you'll always know that if you have multiple environments, the one with the underline is your current selection. Now, there are two ways to run chains, either scheduled or on demand. FHB recommends scheduling the master chain to run for several reasons. Depending on the time of day and the volume of data entry, there may be a longer processing time. With decentralized entry, the finance department may not have accurate entries if the chain hasn't been run. Many clients choose to schedule chains to automatically run at what we call off-peak times. You can tell if a chain is scheduled by the green clock icon at the end of the chain name. So you can see that there is a green clock icon here. And when you hover, it pops up and lets you know when it will run again. Even if it is scheduled, a chain can be run on demand at any time. So to run a chain on demand or to manually run the chain, the one that you would want is the GASB multi-agency chain. And you will come to the end and select the three dots at the far right. You're going to get a pop-up menu. You're going to go to Execute. And then the next screen has three options in the upper right-hand corner: Edit, View, or Run Chain. And in order to run it, you would just simply click Run Chain to start the chain to generate the calculations. The button will be grayed out if a chain is currently in process. Now, you can also see the last run details here. There's a green checkbox. We know everything was great. It took 3 hours, 42 minutes, and 55 seconds. And if it were processing, it would show you this as well. Now, to check the status, again, if it was processing, the last time it was run, succeeded, failed, any error messages of the chain at any time, let's go back to WDesk and let's go to the agency input sheet identifier spreadsheet. And that first spreadsheet is named status. If the chain is running, column A, row 1 will be blue, and row 2 will indicate that the script is running. Once the chain runs, the results will start displaying. If it is successful, the same column A, row 1 will be green, and row 2 will indicate that the script run was successful and the time it took for the chain to run, along with the details, including any agencies processed or skipped, and the procurement with total activity. So in this case, this was the first run after we moved you to production, which is why there is so much data and it took so long. So you can see it tells you 222 minutes. There is lessee, the different agencies, the number of leases, how many processed, none deleted, none failed, none skipped, none that start in the future, and no errors. And as you scroll down, you'll see that they changed for lessor and for GASB 96 as well. If failed, column A, row 1 will be red, and row 2 would indicate the script error along with which agencies. So the message would include an explanation of where the error occurred and the cause of the error to aid in the correction. Most of the messages you should be able to understand. They have been translated into English. There are a few that may not. So if you need help, simply give us a screenshot and a link and write a support ticket. But once the error is corrected, you would need to rerun the chain. Now, column B shows the last time the roll forward execution was done. We're going to discuss roll forward in section 7. And then column C shows the last GASB historical journal entry script execution. This chain was used during implementation and once here in production to calculate the previous year's entries without generating all of the outputs, which greatly reduced the processing time. You can see this one was done in 16 minutes. It does not change the current year data, but creates previous year's activity that is stored on WData tables, which are then used in the queries, which we will talk about in section 6. Now, let's look at the summaries. In the summary section, we will review the standard summaries. The GASB Light tool contains 3 levels of summaries: the organizational or global or executive level, by procurement, by the fund type, the summary and journal entries, the receivable and liability disclosures, then by asset class, and also includes the below threshold leases. The next level is the agency or entity level. This also is by fund type, asset class, and includes below threshold entries plus potential duplicates. And the third is at the individual lease or SPIDA level. This includes all journal entries, disclosures, and schedules, which is created from information on the input sheet. Here are some examples for the summary and journal entries. The lease asset amortization disclosure, the lease asset amortization by period, the lease liability repayment disclosure, and last, the lease liability repayment schedule by period. Here under agencies of the agency input sheet identifiers, we see our first summaries. Here we find the organizational level, which is summarized by procurement. Within the executive summary, and I'm just going to open this, there we go. The summary and journal entries and the receivable liability disclosures are summarized by fund type, either governmental or enterprise. Then by separate disclosure with component unit and internal services. So the CU is component unit. I don't see any internal service. And underneath those, deferred inflow and asset amortization disclosures and the receivable liability disclosures are summarized by asset class, which is indicated by the abbreviations such as BU for buildings, IM for improvements, etc. Following those are the summaries by separate disclosure with the appropriate asset classes, and obviously these are separately stated for disclosure purposes in the ACFR. The ISF amounts are included in the governmental and enterprise and entity-wide totals, but the component units are not included in those totals for disclosure purposes. In Section 2, we reviewed the threshold amounts by asset class. If there were any contracts that were less than the threshold amounts, the below threshold summaries would appear here for both lessee and GASB 96, and here is one for lessee. So this shows you the only one that according to the asset class of furnishings and equipment, the threshold is 5,000 and the calculated present value is 4,290.67 with a difference of 709. It also shares with you the exact department agency, because remember, this is at the global entity level, the fund type, and the fund. So back at the folder structure, under Recent, I have selected Agency 7100 Lessee Input. Now here is the summary spreadsheets. Right here. And nested under it are the same summaries we saw at the global level, except these will only roll up at the agency level and only include the contracts that are in this particular agency. The summary amounts assist in balancing and reconciling by agency, where you can check the inputs and details at the source. Now, when I collapse the spreadsheets, you see a caret, meaning this sideways diamond, beside the other names, which indicate that there are sheets nested under that individual lease. If there is one without an icon, such as this one, you would see an example of what the system generates if the calculation is less than the threshold amount. So when I select this, You see, it's very similar to the information that we just looked at. Now, it is a little bit different as far as the order and the fields, but it is the exact same data and information. So this detail row is consolidated with any others. Now, coincidentally, this was the only one. But if you had 6 departments that had varying lines, they would all be rolled up to the one we just saw at the global level. The system also generates a spreadsheet named potential duplicates. And if the script depicts a potential duplicate in the input sheet, so with many people entering leases, there is the possibility that one or more leases may unknowingly be named the same or similarly. So note only hard duplicates, so duplicates based on short names only, will cause the script to fail, whereas soft duplicates will merely be listed for the user's review. So you can see the only difference in these two is the last digit. Now let's go back to the folder and recent files, and we're going to use agency 26400 to look within the individual lease folder. And here I'm going to click the last icon to consolidate again. So here we want to look at example 264 2014 001 as an example for the 5 spreadsheets, which include the journal entries, disclosures, and schedules. So both disclosures will display data in agreement with the GASB standard of each of the 5 subsequent fiscal years and in the 5-year increments thereafter. So here is why I chose this one to be able to show that. And if I come to the other one. Now, the schedules contain the calculated amounts by period during the term of the lease from the information entered via the input form, the user interface that pushes to the lease input sheet. And then the chains are run. So note that any payments for other preparation costs or additional capital outlays of ASPIDA are added to the underlying asset, as well as the amortization schedule when incurred. And so that information would appear here as well. Now, we chose example 264 2021 002 to be able to show you the Inception entries. The Inception journal entries only display, so I'm going to scroll back here, in the Inception year. So in this section, I have entries with amounts. Thereafter, these entries will be blank so that the summaries will reflect the correct current year activity. And if I were to look at a different one and I look at summary, you see that there is no information here. And now let's jump over to agency 8300 for another example. And I do not have that one recent. So I will come here and go down to 83. Sorry, 083. Here we go. And here I want to use 83-2017-01 to demonstrate entries in the last period of the term of the lease. And here, if I look in the journal entries, and this is in the current year section, and the last entry is to record the retirement or of the right to use asset at end of term. And if I open this back up and I go to my lease liability, and here you can see that we are in our current fiscal year, and that is the end of the contract. So the journal entry will populate with the total amount of accumulated amortization and offset the asset to effectively retire it. And then last but not least, we want to demonstrate entries related to modifications. So if I come back to agency 26400 and we look at the input sheet, you see in the lease version column, there are R1s. So the R means revision, and we're going to look at 2642019-003. And here, when I go to the entries, in this section, below the annual is a section for modifications, remeasurements, and terminations. And so here I am recording the modification or remeasurement and the appropriate entries that are ongoing in the current year. So the difference adjustment is 280,000. And if I look at the lease liability schedule, there's an adjustment column here as well. And there is the 280. And if I come to the amortization schedule, I see the offset there. So you can see that the debt and the asset have been adjusted. Now, just as a note, when we are talking about the input sheets for any of the agencies, if any one agency has more than 157 entries in an input sheet, the system will automatically create an output lease index and multiple output sheets due to a sheet limitation in Workiva. The output lease index sheet will provide the short name, spreadsheet ID, and the name of each lease so that users know which output sheet to open to view the lease details. And you would see that at this level. So instead of just seeing 3, you would have the output lease index sheet as well as output 1, output 2, output 3. Now, let's review other assets. In the Other Assets section, we will discuss the remaining components included in the GASB Lite tool. At the top GASB folder, there are procurements, archive folders, the FHB standards, and client-specific items. The FHB standards include the procurement and archive folders, the agency input sheet identifiers with the non-qualifying contract spreadsheets, the FHB additional tools which contain your queries, and then for client-specific information, that could be anything from implementation or maybe queries and other resources that you deem necessary. Under the FHB tools, which is where we will spend the majority of our discussion, we're going to find the disclosures, the journal entries, and the connected queries we have built to help you. And then your organization is not currently using the non-qualifying contracts functionality. However, we will briefly touch on that as well. Coming full circle back to the GASB parent folder, we see the procurement and archive folders plus several spreadsheets. Some of these are FHB standards and others are client specific. We have reviewed all of the components within the agency input sheet identifiers. So let's look at the last FHB standard spreadsheet, non-qualifying contracts. So although your organization decided during implementation to only enter contracts that qualify for GASB 87 and or 96 disclosure, we still want to share the functionality in your capstone in case you reverse that decision in the future. This spreadsheet is stored at the highest level because it collects all entries from all procurements that were disqualified during the data entry process. It includes the short name, description, contract type, along with the disqualifying question and the response that was given. Note that this does not include leases that are non-qualifying due to not meeting the asset class thresholds. This is simply based on the qualification questions in the user interface. It is an FHB recommended best practice that this sheet be reviewed internally, as many clients have shared that their auditors use this sheet to test the completeness assertion. If it is determined that a contract was included incorrectly, you can enter the short name into the delete non-GASB contracts spreadsheet and then run the GASB non-qualifying contracts chain in Wdata to remove it from here, or wait simply for the next scheduled run to complete. This chain is set as scheduled during configuration. As a reminder, you would then need to enter the lease with the correct responses and run the chain to update the calculations. Back at the GASB folder, the remaining items in the folder are client specific and may include FHB custom queries, client created queries, and other information created or uploaded during implementation. FHB additional tools includes a set of Wdata connected sheets, as well as disclosures and journal entries. The Wdata connected sheets are incoming connections. This icon, when you hover, will tell you that. And to refresh the data results, once you have run the chain, you would right-click on the connection icon and refresh incoming. Or you can use the right-hand toolbar and the connections are the last icon here. You can choose the specific one that you happen to be on. So if I am on all contract inputs, you will see a blue vertical line on this particular one. So it tells me I am there. I can click on the icon here to refresh, or if I wanted to refresh them all, I can do that by clicking at the top. Some some queries will have other fields that need to be answered. So for example, if I go to journal entries and I click on query, it opens up the parameters. So the parameter for this one does require the fiscal year end, which is currently at 6/30/24. Once you have rolled forward to 2025, you would need to update that to 25 by simply clicking in the field, backspacing 1 and typing a 5 or selecting June 30, 25. And that will activate the apply and refresh to be bright green and you would select it. Thereafter, it would save that parameter that you have input. Your organization is using queries in place of or to supplement the standard summaries. The standard summaries, are what we covered in the summary section. So to review these, all contract inputs is a listing of all the contracts within the system, presenting data similar to the input sheet, allowing you to easily filter. This actually captures all types. So I can do select all and apply, so that if I am looking for a specific lease, it will tell me exactly. I can find it by filtering and actually go to that. I'm going to turn all of these on so that we can have everything. If you only wanted specific departments, you could do that. If you only wanted to know the ones that were revised or terminated, you could do that as well. So these filters work similarly to how Excel does. Now, the other thing with any of these spreadsheets is that you can also export them so that you can work with them within Excel. So under File, you would go to Save As and Excel. And then you would be able to manage that with a lookup table or sorting, filtering in any manner that you might like. All journal entries is a listing of all the journal entries within the system, similar to all contract inputs. And I will discuss the journal entries here in just a moment. The lease summaries queries summarizes all of the calculations for all of the contracts. This is one that could be used to compare the present value calculations with the lease asset classes to confirm the thresholds due to changes not currently able to be made in the tool without recalculating prior year leases with new threshold amounts. And then the future payments query subtotals all of the payments by the subsequent 5 years, then in 5-year subtotals to provide disclosure amounts. The different future payment tables above are populated by applying the filters to the results of this query. The two continuity queries here provide the calculations of the opening balances, additions, and deletions to derive the net change and ending balances necessary to populate the continuity disclosure tables above. The journal entry spreadsheets are provided to allow you to easily check journal entries by the filtered selections without needing to use the queries and or search different agencies for specific details. So here the asterisk means that it is a wildcard and will bring back everything. If I want to change this to only see those in an asset class or a specific fund or a specific agency or department, or if it is a separate disclosure. So if I were to type CU for a component unit, those types of things. This is the information that will update. And then the disclosure tables at the top literally will pull the information from these queries into a more usable format for you. So here, if I had a fund type of governmental, then my information would change accordingly here. I could change that for any of my information. This shows you with the green little carrots here that these are calculated sales. And if I open this more, you can see it is simply a sum if that is using the all accounts continuity and all of the fields there so that it will populate accordingly as we see fit in these tables below. And these can be copied, updated, whatever you might need those to be. So in this one, you can see this is GASB 96, and if I change that to simply be, let's see. So they're all examples of easy and flexible alternatives to produce necessary reporting in a specific format that might otherwise be custom development. Now let's look forward to next year. In this section, we will be discussing roll forward. Because of the nature of this process, we will not be able to include a demonstration of the process in your workspace. For the GASB Light tool, the roll forward process differs from other Workiva projects you may have been involved with. Roll forward includes several processes that are completed with a specific chain. These processes include snapshots of all leases archived by year in Wdesk and all journal entries archived by year in Wdata. The system performs a verification check and then advances the year-end date by one and prepares for all recalculations. To recalculate the outputs for the new year, we would run the main zero GASB multi-agency chain. This automated process provides two important benefits. The archival of spreadsheets with the calculated results being placed into an archive folder so the lease outputs can be preserved for auditing purposes, and the archival of journal entries so that custom queries can be created to facilitate rolling forward balances. Note that each year all values are recalculated based on the current fiscal year. Here we have provided step-by-step directions. However, we can certainly provide this service if requested in a support ticket. Currently, this is the preferred choice of clients and generally takes only 1 to 2 hours of our time. We do not charge for the processing time of Workiva, which may take up to 24 hours depending on the volume of data. As always, we recommend that clients schedule this task in advance using our support system, which we will review next in our final section. This is our final section of our capstone training of your implementation. During this time, we will remind you of our best practices, some tips to remember, as well as share some valuable available resources as you begin your experience with Workiva and the GASB Lite tool. There are only a few best practices to remember, but they are important ones. Always use the user interface input form, allowing the system to translate the data correctly to reduce manual errors. Remember that the system requires a certain format to be able to understand the data. We know that if you were part of the implementation, you probably spent some time editing the input sheet. However, that is not the recommended method of entering or editing contract information. More support tickets we receive are related to the manual entry of something in an improper format, such as entering dollar signs or commas instead of just the numbers. Schedule the master chain. You need to be able to know that your calculations are current, complete, and timely. Review the non-qualifying contracts. I know, again, you're not using this, but it is still one of our best recommended practices. As clients have shared that their auditors use this sheet to test the completeness assertion. And then we have several tips we would like to share as well. So bookmarks can be used throughout Workiva as it is a browser-based solution. So for example, the status is an easy one that you might want to bookmark. And I will just put that on my bookmarks bar. so that you can always look here when you first log in. And then always check the status page when you log in to ensure that the last change was successful and or recent. And then the queries that are on the FHB Additional Tools spreadsheet. It is a perfect solution to look at data in multiple ways other than the standard summaries. We discussed examples in Section 6. Workiva 101 and 201 are great courses for training, or we can help you build new assets to your specifications. Here are some resources as takeaways. Note that Workiva Help, the question mark, has moved from the bottom left to the top right of the screen. You can easily access their Learning Hub, new features, and customer support from the drop-down. And now let's walk through the process of requesting support from us. If I go to our FHB homepage, you would select Request Technical Support at the bottom of the screen. And on the next screen, you would click the Request Support Help button at the top and complete the necessary fields. In the description field, you can even include the URL link to your exact screen. The last is a file upload where you can upload screenshots of your issue, which is another great way to tell your story or identify your point. And then you would scroll to the bottom and submit. This process ensures your request is managed by our client services team and will be assigned and tracked for a timely response. And then the last item to share is our professional development calendar. So back on our home page, going back to the bottom of the page for professional development, and here you see a calendar of upcoming dates. You can filter by topic, you can filter by price, you can flip through the calendar. And so if you wanted to look for Workiva, you would only see those. Workiva 101 is one of the courses that we have discussed that is right in line with your queries. So some courses have a fee, but others are free. And then if you see something of interest, you want to register as early as possible because many courses do fill up quickly. And don't forget about your CPE requirements. We are NASBA certified. So this wraps up the last section as well as your entire capstone video. Thank you for being an FHB client, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.